it's a pleasure for me to discuss Netsuke, some of the world's tiniest and most delightful works of sculpture. Now, as Miyako said, Japan Foundation has created a whole series of wonderful videos about Japanese art called Doors to the Arts of Japan. And one of the videos is about Netsuke. It's about 20 minutes long, and it provides really valuable insight into the history of Netsuke, how they were made, how they were used and collected and worn. And I would highly recommend watching it to learn more about Netsuke. Now, my talk today will be a very basic introduction to Netsuke, and I'll outline the most common materials and types and techniques, and introduce some of the common subjects depicted in Netsuke. And I'm going to be using images from the collection of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, or LACMA, because it's one of the best collections of Netsuke in the world, and we have it right here in Los Angeles. So I wanted to emphasize that tonight. The opening image, let me see, I'm going to share my screen. The opening image here you've seen before because you signed up for this webinar, and this is not in the LACMA collection, although they do have a very similar ivory rabbit or hare with amber eyes. But this is the actual hare with amber eyes, Netsuke, that gave its name to a best-selling memoir written by Edmond de Waal about his family, the Efrusi family, who were a very wealthy and important European banking family, a Jewish banking family. And among their treasured belongings was a collection of Japanese Netsuke. And this beautiful ivory Netsuke was carved in 1880 by a carver called Masatoshi. And it's carved out of elephant tusk ivory, and its eyes are inlaid with amber buffalo horn. So I thought this, because we're in the last months of the year of the rabbit, I wanted to begin with a rabbit Netsuke. So what actually are Netsuke? Now, simply put, they are miniature sculptures, but they're more than just sculptures. They're actually made with a specific function. And the function relates to traditional Japanese dress, or kimono, and two specific aspects of traditional Japanese dress. One is the fact that the kimono doesn't have any zips or buttons. It is wrapped around the front and then tied and held together with an obi. The Netsuke directly relates to the obi because it basically sits on the obi. The second aspect of the kimono that the Netsuke that caused the appearance of Netsuke was the fact that kimono don't have any pockets. So in order to carry objects around, you had to figure out special, clever ways. And for women, typically very light items were slipped into their sleeves, or if they were carrying a fan, they would insert the fan into the top of the obi. But for men, personal items were generally hung from the obi. And what we're seeing is an example of that here, where the what is known as a sagemono, or an item that's hung, and in this case it's an inro, we'll talk about that in a moment, is basically hung from a braided silk cord, and which is slipped under the obi and then is basically secured by this Netsuke at the top, this toggle. So the Netsuke has the function of securing the sagemono to the obi, or the sash that connects the kimono. Now here's a diagram of the same thing going on with the inro and the ojime bead that basically tightens the cord, and then the inro at the top. This is what is known as an inro ensemble, very popular in the Edo period. Now it's the name Netsuke means root attachment, which doesn't really describe what it looks like at all, but it gives us an idea of the origins of or what early Netsuke might have looked like. And it's known, not a whole lot is known about early Netsuke, but a lot of them were made out of interesting pieces of wood, or a root, for example, perhaps something like this, or stones or nuts, I think that I think that was the list I had. Shells, that was the other one. And often in order to make them into these counterweights for the sagemono, they would have to have two holes drilled into the back so that the cord could be passed through, and then the sagemono could be suspended from the belt. So these I actually just photographed. I have collections of stones and pieces of wood. So I used my own collection to kind of illustrate what some very, very early netsuke might have looked like. And sagemono seem to have appeared fairly widely in Japan around the late 16th century. This is, I think, is when the first inros start to appear. And inro are basically little containers made of wood and usually lacquered that would originally have contained your seal, your personal seal, so you could sign documents. And the word inro means seal basket. But there were other sagemono that were also common over the next few centuries, including writing sets, pipes, tobacco pouches, and money pouches. And these would all be hung like this on a cord or later a chain, and then suspended from the belt in this manner. And these became extremely popular in the Edo period. So from about the 17th century onwards, in these sagemono ensembles were worn mostly by men, and they were very popular among merchants, the merchant class, because the government was constantly restricting what the merchants wore, because the merchants were becoming wealthier and wealthier and more ostentatious. So there were many sumptuary reforms that limited the types of kimonos, the types of fabric that merchants could wear. The government didn't want the merchants to look too rich. So the merchants, because they could only wear very plain kimonos and relatively plain obi, would put their money into their accessories. And so they would commission various craftsmen to make them a very fabulous inro out of lacquered wood with many different inlays, and often inlaid metals like gold, silver, and also very ornate netsuke. And so this is how the merchant class would show off their wealth. And they would often not just wear them to show off, but when they would meet with clients or friends or customers, they would take off their nets, the ensemble, and show off their latest inro or netscape. And this was a way of establishing conversation, but also showing off their wealth and their sophistication. Now, I'm going to share with you a number of wonderful netsuke that are in the LACMA collection. This is the first. This is a gorgeous netsuke made of wood, and it dates to the 19th century, and it shows a pair of wrestling Chinese lions. And this is wood is one of the most common materials used by netsuke carvers. Wood is abundant in Japan. Many different types of wood have been carved into many different types of sculpture for centuries, primarily Buddhist sculpture in Buddhist temples, and some of the earliest the earliest wooden netsuke were probably carved by the sculptors who worked on Buddhist sculpture, and they perhaps carved a few netsuke on the side, and then some of them perhaps left the world of religious sculpture and specialized in netsuke. Now, other materials include ivory, clay, metal, and we'll see a few of those today. Now, there are several different types of netsuke, and this is one of the most common and popular types of netsuke. It's known as katabori, which basically means shape carving. And it's basically a form that's carved in the round. So you see the whole animal here. The entire netsuke is in the shape of the two lions wrestling. And this is a chance for carvers to show off their technique. These are completely three-dimensional designs. And you see the delicate and very detailed approach to carving here. This item is only about an inch in size, yet I mean what we're looking at right now is magnified. So you can see that it's quite extraordinary craftsmanship that goes into carving these. Another example of katabori, a katabori netsuke, is this. This is also in wood, carved out of wood. This pair of tigers or tiger cubs wrestling, and this is very similar to the tiger, the mother and baby tiger that is the netsuke on the Japan Foundation video that you'll see at the end of this presentation. A really beautiful and playful toggle for somebody to carry around. And in the case of most netsuke, the netsuke has two holes on the back, but sometimes the netsuke carvers or netsuke shi, they use natural openings. So, for example, I'm not sure if this has two holes in the back, but it's quite possible that the cord would be passed through the opening here that's formed by the tail of one of the tiger cubs. And this is another lovely katabori netsuke in the shape of a horse, and this is carved out of ivory. And ivory is one of the most popular materials used in netsuke, partly because it's very easy to carve, but also because the material has such a beautiful warm tone. And when it's handled, it develops a patina that is very satisfying. It's very smooth to the touch, and this is the tactile nature of netsuke is also extremely important. It was being worn and handled quite often by the owner, and with collectors, I've met a few netsuke collectors, and they always love holding their netsuke and have often allowed me to handle their netsuke as well. And the feeling of the holding the netsuke in your palm is very important as well, not just how it looks, but how it feels in your palm. And ivory is particularly has a particularly satisfying feel. And this is another very different approach to carving ivory. The horse is a very simple form, and you can see the patina. I'll show you it again. The horse is a very, very soft. The curve of the horse's back allows for the patina to develop really beautifully. But here, this is a much more elaborate carving of a creature called a baku, who is a mythical creature, a yokai who's believed to devour nightmares. And he's been carved much more elaborately in a very Chinese style. And what's really interesting about this carving is that the artist has used sumi ink to stain the ivory to give it a sort of antique look, but also to add depth to the appearance of the carved details. Apparently, there are also traces of red pigment in this as well. So the ivory was not just used for its beautiful sort of off-white tone, but it was also used as a ground for decorating with other pigments like sumi ink and red pigment. And I think this is the final katabori netsuke that's carved in the round, but this one's made out of ceramic. It's actually stoneware netsuke from the Bizen kilns in Okayama, one of my favorite types of Japanese ceramics. And this is of a rather startled looking rabbit from the front, a frontal view of rabbits. I don't know if many cultures specialize in frontal views of rabbits quite as well as the Japanese do. I think the Japanese create the best images of rabbits. And here you see very intense expression is emphasized by the incised markings around his eyes and his deep nostrils. I wouldn't be surprised if these are the nostrils, or I actually think that yeah, I'm not sure where the cord would have passed, but it looks like the cord might have passed through his eyes. That seems unlikely, but and then you see the markings for his fur on his legs. He's really adorable. The next type of netsuke are known as manju netsuke, and manju, for those of you who like Japanese food, are a type of dumpling that's filled with bean paste. And these manju netsukes are pretty much in their form. They're generally round and flat and either concave or convex. Some are oval shaped, some are even square, and some are made in two parts that join together. But most of them are round and flat, and they have a small ring attached to the back, and that's where the cord is passed through. And they usually have a good side, although some are carved completely, entirely over the entire surface, but most of them have a side that is worn, the front of the netsuke, so you can see it hanging over the obi. And this one is made out of ivory, and it is carved with a design that's taken from a 14th century Chinese historical novel called The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and it became really popular during the Edo period. Was uh, was printed a lot in woodblock printed books, and you see scenes of from this story a lot in Japanese woodblock prints. This is from the 19th century. The scene is very similar to scenes that you'll see in woodblock prints from that period as well. It shows the hero Gentoku riding his horse into the sea over the waves, and it's just really beautifully carved in relief, but quite deeply into the inside of the manju, into the inside of the dumpling. And you can see that it is also stained to create added depth to the design. And this is another manju netsuke that is really exquisite. It's made of wood that has been inlaid with ivory and tortoiseshell and mother of pearl details, depicting chrysanthemums and a butterfly. And I can imagine that this netsuke would have been worn probably in the autumn because of the chrysanthemum is a seasonal motif associated with the autumn, and really exquisite. I'm sure this would have been a very expensive piece. And this is another manju netsuke. It's a particular type of manju netsuke, but that's known as a ryusa netsuke, and it's basically characterized by open work designs. The type is named after a netsuke artist, Netsuke Shi, called Ryusa, who was active in Edo in the 19th century, and he specialized in basically taking car creating taking a manju of a solid material and carving it, hollowing it out, and then carving designs using open work techniques. So carving very deeply so that that each of the elements of the design are almost three-dimensional. So this is a very much deeper kind of carving. And as you can see, this is the subject here is the 12 zodiac animals. So you have the dragon, the horse. I think that's a dog. I'm not sure what animal. There's a rooster there. I think that's the rabbit there, and this is probably the ox. And each of them has inlaid eyes and really beautiful detail in the teeth and the dragon scales. Um, Even though these are carved very intricately with open work, they still had to be very smooth so they don't snag the clothing. This is another very important characteristic of all types of netsukes, that they must be very smooth on the surface, not just to be fun to touch, but also so that they don't snag the kimono fabric or the obi fabric, or scratch the inro or other sagemono that they're paired with. Now, a third type of netsuke are the kagami buta or kagami netsuke, and kagami means mirror. And traditionally in East Asia, mirrors were made of bronze or other metals, and they were discs, and they were polished highly so that you could see a reflection in them. Now, for this type of netsuke, they're usually made up of two parts. There's the disc in the center, which is kind of like a lid as well. And then there is the frame, which is in the shape of a bowl. So it's like a lid sitting on a bowl. And the disc is made out of metal, and then the bowl is usually made of wood or ivory, some of the material. And as you can see here, the metal disc has beautifully decorated with inlaid metals like gold and other, I believe this is a copper alloy, and designs here of one of the 36 legendary immortal poets in Japanese tradition. This is Hitomaro, and he is accompanied by an oni, a little demon, who seems to be working for him. I noticed that he is actually grinding the ink for him, and you can see Hitomaro has his brush. He's ready to write a poem, and the oni is his helper here, which I think is a beautiful image. really exquisite workmanship. A lot of the artists who created these metal kagami, the metal part of the kagami netsuke were talented artists who worked in sword fittings, decorative sword fittings, and other metal work as well. This is a particularly exquisite one. And then we have this really rustic, really charming image of a tengu, the mountain spirit, another yokai. Here, tengu are usually half man, half bird, and they often are depicted either with a beak or a very long nose. And so this fellow looks like a really wild man of the mountains. He is carved, or he was, yeah, very deeply carved into the metal disc. And around him is this very rustic looking wood bowl. And this is a very less sophisticated, much more folky image here on this Kagami Netsuke. And as you can see here, a lot of the images, some of the subjects in the Netsuke are taken from real life, like some of the animals and the floral designs, but a lot are taken from folklore, from historical legends. A lot of the artists who created these Netsuke drew their inspiration or drew from images that they found in woodblock prints or woodblock printed books that were very popular during the Edo period. This is a very beloved subject in Netsuke decoration and design. This Netsuke is actually made out of stag antler ivory, so hence the length of the Netsuke. So it's a katabori type Netsuke, but it's because it's carved in the round, but it's a very elongated Netsuke, which could also hook very securely over the obi. And it depicts two characters called Ashinaga, meaning long legs, and Tenaga. And they are two characters in Japanese folklore who cooperate with each other to help each other to help each other find food. And in most depictions or most stories about them, Tenaga will climb on Ashinaga's shoulders, and Ashinaga will wade into the sea and then bend down, and Tenaga will reach his long arms down into the sea and catch fish. And so this is all about cooperation and collaboration, even if you're very different people. I love the sort of story behind this particular Netsuke. So I'm sure this would be a conversation piece, would have been a conversation piece. And here you see the fish that Tenaga has grabbed, really beautifully decorated here. Now, this Netsuke is very different from anything we've seen before. It's actually 19th century. When I first saw it, I thought it must be a contemporary piece. And there are many contemporary Netsuke carvers in Japan and around the world. And they are carving in many similar, using similar techniques and styles. You cannot carve elephant ivory as easily as the Netsuke carvers of the Edo period because of international restrictions on elephant hunting for ivory. There are still some Netsuke carvers who will carve with ivory, but it has to have been ivory, antique ivory that dates before the international restrictions. But this is a 19th century piece. It's made out of cedar or sugi, the cryptomeria, and the Netsuke, the artist, has used the grain of the wood really beautifully to sort of create this very stylized approach to the feathers of the bird. I can imagine that this has been handled many times. You can see that you can see the shine, the patina that's developed here. This would be a very satisfying Netsuke to hold. So I think this was my last of the Lakma Netsuke. So I'm going to end here to give us plenty of time for questions. This is the tiger image that is similar to the one in the Lakma collection. This one's a mother tiger with a baby cub on her back. But I'm guessing that it was made by the same artist as the artist who made the one in the Lakma collection. So I'm going to I highly recommend that you watch the Doors to the Arts of Japan video on Netsuke. It's about 20 minutes long, so there's quite a lot of information in it. It's a really interesting, I find it very informative, very interesting. I particularly like the interview with the modern Netsuke carver, who has been carving in many different materials, and his work is just exquisite. So if I had never actually seen and Netsuke Carver explained his work before. So the video was a real treat for me.